Hello, LSP Network, and welcome to another one of the LIHEAP Program Year 2021 training videos. This is, I don't know what order you're watching them in, but for me, this is number 5 in terms of the presentations that I have recorded. I do believe this is going to be the last one, unless we get a lot of questions and decide that we need to do another one. But this has been quite an experience. So this is probably my last hour of having to talk to a vacant screen, which I'm excited about. And we are going to be talking about budget and award management for this session. And essentially, this is something that we haven't really focused on in recent years. But first of all, we have a very exciting change that Emily and I are just really over the moon about being able to roll out to you guys. It might sound scary at first, but I hope that everyone's going to see that this is going to be a net positive, I think, for everybody. And there are just a few things that we wanted to review and kind of bring back into focus. So this might be a little bit in the weeds. This probably isn't going to be very helpful for line level staff. Of course, those line level staff are more than welcome to watch this video anyway and learn more about kind of the behind the scenes operations of the program. But we would really love to get some engagement from LSP's fiscal teams and kind of to encourage more proactive teamwork there, as well as just kind of encourage some real examination of how the budget and the award management works from the manager perspective as well. So with that introduction out of the way, I'm going to get right into this, and I'm going to share my screen, and I will be going away. All right, so at this point, hopefully everyone can see my slideshow here. Once again, this is LIHEAP Budget and Award Management. I'm going to begin with just an overview of what the budgets are going to look like for program year 2021. So beginning in 2021, LSPs will have 7 line items to which they can budget their subawards. And these line items are going to be eligibility and admin, direct program expenses, assurance 16, regular benefits, crisis benefits, emergency repair and replacement, and emergency services. And those of you who have already spent years working with your budgets will recognize that direct program expenses is the new one that we're adding for this year. So the others should be familiar, but we're still going to go through them anyway. So we're going to begin with that eligibility and admin line. Eligibility admin budget can be used to cover overall administration and operation of the program. Eligibility costs can include, but are not limited to, EAP administrative functions, including program planning, staff training, reporting, and allocated costs such as rent, utilities, maintenance, and general supplies. EAP service delivery functions, including fiscal, executive, supervisory, and support operations, and any expense that is otherwise eligible to be paid using direct program expenses. LSPs may budget up to 7.5% of their total expenditures to eligibility and admin. Eligibility and admin may not be supplemented with any other federal funds. And because the 7.5% maximum is based on expenditures and not initial award, LSPs may need to pay back a portion if they max out their eligibility admin line but underspend on their overall budget. So I am kind of burying the lead here with this 7.5. As many of you know, this is actually a change from previous years where it was 8.5. But to go along with that change, we are introducing the direct program expenses line item. So it's a new budget line item for program year 2021. And direct program expenses are defined as costs that are specific to the delivery of EAP and do not otherwise contribute to the overall operations of the agency nor to any other program. Direct program expenses may not pay for indirect or allocated costs, nor may you charge payroll for management, executive, or supervisory staff to direct program expenses, even if that manager or supervisor only oversees EAP. All these expenses must be charged within that 7.5% eligibility or admin, or you can pay them from unrestricted funds. Now, here's kind of the crux of it here. So direct program expenses will include your salaries or payroll for your line level intake staff, any supplies needed by that intake staff in order to determine eligibility that will not be used for any other purpose in the agency, your client outreach, and also any technology needs that, as long as those technology needs will only be utilized by EAP staff in eligibility determination, intake, or outreach. So your direct program expenses has a cap of 2.5% of the LSP's EAP award. So even though we did cut back eligibility admin from 8.5 to 7.5, we are giving you this additional 2.5 to cover expenses that historically would have just gone into admin and been part of that 8.5%. So what we've essentially done is open it up so that you really get more like 10% to be able to play around with. The other good thing about the direct to program expenses line item is that because this doesn't fall under the federal admin, it's based on your award, not your expenditures. So even if you underspend on your overall budget, it will not trigger a payback during closeout. Now, if you do budget 2.5% to direct program expenses and you end up maxing it out and exhausting it, any of these functions can also be paid out of eligibility and admin as long as you still have funding in that line. But it would most likely be in everyone's best interest that you try to charge it to direct program expenses first, rather than going right to that eligibility or admin. All right, Assurance 16, of course, I'm sure everyone is familiar with, but just to review, it refers to the optional 16th assurance of the federal LIHEAP statute. This assurance allows grantees to set aside a maximum of 5% of its award to engage in services and activities that are designed to reduce clients' household energy needs and thereby reduce the need for energy assistance. Essentially, we can use up to 5% of our award to try to engage in activities that will make LIHEAP unnecessary for our households. In Indiana, authorized Assurance 16 activities include energy education programs, direct case management services aimed at increasing self-sufficiency, and referral and advocacy activities that will reasonably be expected to contribute toward reducing household energy need and enabling energy security. So this might include things like needs assessments, counseling, energy education workshops, family development casework, or assisting client households in negotiating payment agreements. Once again, LSPs may budget up to 5% of their total award to Assurance 16 activities. That does apply to the total award, not to your obligation or expenditures. So if you underspend on your award at closeout, this will not trigger any kind of payback. Emergency benefits. This includes emergency repair and replacement and emergency services. And you may budget up to 10% of your total award to those two lines combined. We're not going to give any kind of requirements on how that split is made. You can do 5%, 5%. You can do 7%, 3%. You can do all 10% to emergency repair and replace and put nothing into emergency services. And you don't have to do 10%. You can put less than 10% in there. The only real requirement is that all LSPs are required to maintain funding, at least in the emergency repair and replacement line item, at least through March 15th. And that is because we did decide last year that we did not want any of our households to not have access to this benefit simply by virtue of where they live. So we do want everyone to have this available as a benefit to their applicants, and in order to have it available, you need to maintain some funding in there. There is no requirement to maintain any funding within the emergency services line. Once again, that 10% maximum is based on total award, not on your obligations or expenditures. And then we will be getting into this in a little bit more detail later, but because these benefits are only available until March 15th, after March 15th, we do strongly encourage our LSPs to defund any remaining funds from these line items and reallocate them to your regular benefits and or your crisis benefits. And speaking of regular and crisis benefits, that is where you're going to put the balance of your award after you've allocated everything else. It is of note that all LSPs are required to allocate at least 8% of the total award amount to crisis benefits through March 15th. And that is a federal requirement. So here's just a handy chart to review those line items. So once again, your eligibility admin, you can put up to a maximum of 7.5%. That is eventually going to be calculated based on your obligations or expenditures at closeout. And so if you max that line out, but you don't spend everything else, then you may end up going over that 7.5%, and that may trigger a payback. Your direct program expenses, you can put up to 2.5% of your total award. That is not going to be calculated against your expenditures at closeout. Assurance 16, it's completely optional. You can put anywhere between 0 and 5% of your total award into that line item. Emergency services and emergency repair and replace. So you can put a total of 10% between those two line items based on the total award. And it is required that you maintain some kind of funding in emergency repair and replace, but you don't have to fund emergency services at all if you choose not to. And then crisis benefits, there is a minimum allocation of 8% of your total award, at least through March 15th. And regular benefits is obviously going to drive much of your award. Okay, so now we are going to get more into the nitty-gritty of administering your budgets and your awards. And let's talk about budget amendments. So everyone is going to experience budget amendments in some way. So first of all, whenever IHCDA receives additional funding from Health and Human Services, we will put that funding through the allocation table and issue amendments to all active LSP subawards. Those amendments may also be issued as a result of an involuntary deobligation of funding, such as if an LSP does not meet the benchmarks. A voluntary deobligation by an LSP, we have had that happen before, where sometimes we have an agency who just says, hey, we're not going to spend all of this funding. We know that there's another agency who is running low. We would like to deobligate a certain amount of our funding and allow it to go, be invested into the network. And we are always very grateful when LSP decides to do that. And we also would issue an amendment due to an approved request for additional funding by an LSP. Now, those requests for funding are expected to be sent to IHCDA once an LSP has obligated 90% of its benefit lines. And the reason for that is we are trying to get as much of this funding as possible out into the community and into the accounts of our low-income households. And so we don't want any LSPs to turn applicants away simply because they have run out of funding, especially if we still have funding available to distribute. We want to ensure that those LSPs are proactively requesting that funding once they start to run low on their funding. So what we put into place is that when you get about 90% of your crisis and regular combined, once you spend about 90% of that, that's when you should really be submitting that funding request to IHCDA to try to get an amendment to get some additional funding. Those additional funding requests will be reviewed by the community programs team and then would have to be approved by IHCDA's executive director before being granted. Upon approval, community program staff will draft and issue an amendment. That amendment is then executed by the executive director of the LSP, as well as the executive director of IHCDA. And then community program staff must receive and approve a completed budget corresponding to the new amendment amount from the LSP before we can update the budget in our system. And here at the bottom of this slide are the requirements in order for a funding request to be considered. So a funding request must be submitted on LSP letterhead, must be signed by the executive director of the LSP, and it must include the estimated number of clients to be served, including a summary of all existing appointments that are scheduled and mail-in applications that are on hand, the average benefit per client at this point in the program year, the estimated amount of funds of the request that will be used for program administration and or the direct program expenses, the total amount of funds that are being requested, and the estimated length of time that the requested funds would cover. Budget modification may be submitted at any time with or without a corresponding amendment. Budget modifications must be signed by the LSP EAP manager or a designee. If you have designees that you're going to be using to submit these budget modifications, it would be very helpful for us if you could give us a list of your authorized designees. And prior to executing budget modifications, community program staff will review the requests and ensure that all line items meet the applicable requirements with regard to minimum or maximum amount of allocation. If we receive a budget modification that has not been signed, or if it does not meet the policy requirements for any given line item, then the budget modification will not be approved, and community program staff will contact the LSP to request a new budget modification. And finally, I just want to go into a few best practice suggestions. Some of these, I'll be honest, are from my own experience as an EAP manager at the LSP level. Some of these are come from observations that I've had in my current role. And some of these come from discussions that I've had with Renee or that we've had with other LSPs during monitoring. And these are going to be kind of an evolving list. But for now, what we have here is our #1 best practice suggestion would be to monitor your obligations regularly. You should really kind of create a schedule to monitor your obligations versus your total budget and stick to it. And then you should consider monitoring these obligations daily once you get closer to about 75% obligation on your benefit lines. And again, we're talking essentially your regular and your crisis lines there. And also, please be proactive in thinking about requesting those additional funds. And remember that it does take some time to run these requests through IHCDA leadership and then for us to draft and generate the amendments. You know, we do have to enter that information. There's a lot of fields in the, while we do have a template, there are a lot of fields that need to be changed and updated every time we issue one of these amendments. It really does require quite a bit of work on our end, and then loading them into Adobe Sign, and it's a process. So we want you to be cognizant of that, and which is why we suggest that you issue the request once you hit 90% obligation, so that we have time to get your requests through all those processes. If you're not issuing the request until after you've already overspent, that's going to put everyone in a difficult situation. And kind of going along with that, one of the requirements in the amendment, in the amendment request policy is to specify how long you expect the funds to last you. So if we're 2 months out from the end of the program year, the application period, and you're requesting an amount that would correspond to 1 month, you might want to consider upping that so that you can issue one amendment for that 2-month period. Again, it's kind of a time and work intensive process, and so if we can do one amendment for 2 months versus 2 amendments for 1 month each, we would much rather do that. It would be much easier for everyone in the long run. And if it comes down to an issue of us not having the funding, then we actually do have a policy in place where we can adjust. We can partially approve you for a certain amount based on the funding that we have available. So don't worry about asking for too much and us not having available, because if that's the case, then we can either, if we're expecting more funding to come through, we can kind of hold it back until that funding comes through, or we can partially approve it. I know that we have done that for some agencies within the past year or two. Second best practice suggestion: consider how you might maximize your ability to completely obligate your funding. And what I mean by this is to look at the funding intervals and be intentional in how you then assign funding to that line. So for instance, regular benefits, because of the way the matrix works, should always be in multiples of $25. So therefore, if you've allocated $750,000 and $2.49 to your regular benefits line, then you will find yourself in a scenario where you will never be able to spend that down completely, and you will always be leaving $2.49 on the table. So what we would suggest as a best practice is, after allocating your other lines, if you find that you have an odd number in your regular benefits or just a number that is not divisible by 25, consider rounding that number down to the highest $25 increment and then putting the excess into your crisis benefits. Be aware of timelines with regards to those emergency benefits lines, and that would be your emergency services and your emergency repair and replace. So as we've already said, unless ICDA issues additional guidance or grants a specific exception, emergency services and emergency repair and replace may only be administered through March 15th. So therefore, if you keep funds in those lines after March 15th, then those funds are essentially unusable and will prevent you from reaching peak efficiency in your administration of the funds. And in a worst case scenario, it might impact your admin cap. As a result, ICDA strongly recommends submitting a budget modification to move all excess funds out of these line items and into your regular benefits and/or crisis benefits after March 15th. Our next suggestion is to look at your LSP's track record on your obligations. Take a hard look at your LSP's history in the past few years with regards to how closely you have been able to spend your entire award obligation. If you find that you have consistently not expended your entire award, then you may want to consider taking that into account when determining your eligibility or admin allocation. Remember, that line item is based on total expenditures rather than on the award amount. And so if you underspend your award, but in the process you've maxed out your admin line, then you may find yourself in a position where you need to pay back a portion of that admin. And that's not a position that ICDA wants to see any of our LSPs in. Our next suggestion is to communicate openly and regularly with your fiscal team. Please be sure that your fiscal team has access to the EAP policies and procedures manuals and understands the requirements. Encourage them to ask questions of you, of the executive director. They can contact us and ask questions if they have it. You may want to share this training with your fiscal team as well. And we would really, IHCDA is very open to kind of facilitating more open interaction with LSP's fiscal teams. And so please let us know if future trainings with a finer focus on fiscal issues would be helpful to your agency. And finally, we really want to hear from you. As I said, these best practice suggestions are coming from essentially from me or from the rest of my team. But as I've said, I think in a couple of these other videos, we recognize that you're the ones who do this day in and day out, and you really are the experts in the field here. So we want to hear from you. We would love to be able to share your best practices. I'm sure that many of you have things that I haven't even thought of that have not come up during monitoring that we could potentially share and really help out the rest of the network. So if you have any of those, please feel free to send them to liheap@ihcda.in.gov, and we'd be happy to communicate them out. All right, and that brings me to the end of presentation number 5. We hope that everyone is excited with the change that we've made to the budget this year. We think that that's really going to open up. I know that a lot of LSPs over the past few years have communicated that the 8.5% really presents a really tight margin for operation and makes it difficult to operate efficiently and in some cases hire enough staff. We're trying not to go too far overboard. We're trying to be somewhat conservative in how we roll this out, which is why we went with 2.5%. We really want to be cognizant of the fact that that there are a lot of eyes on LIHEAP at the federal level, and we want to show that we are being intentional and efficient with how we administer it, and that the majority of the funding that we received really does go to direct benefits to eligible households in need. But we also wanted to be able to give you guys a little bit more breathing room with regards to your budget, and in order to do things like hire quality staff, hire enough staff, and to purchase any technology upgrades or enhancements that you may need. We want you to be able to run this program to the best of your ability, and we understand that sometimes that just requires the spending of some money. So we think that this is really going to open up some doors for all of the agencies. We think this is going to be a net positive. Emily and I are really excited. We see this as a big win, and we're excited to see how you all respond to it. So I will be talking to everyone at the Q&A sessions. Thank you so much for your participation and attention during these trainings. Thank you for sticking with me through what I think has totaled about 4 hours of content. At least it's felt like 4 hours on my end. It might be a little bit shy of 4. And please feel free if there's something else that I need to go over in fine detail that would really benefit from this format, from having a PowerPoint presentation and a video that can be reviewed at any time, please let us know. I am very open to creating more of these and really making this part of our training model for this year. So please hit me back with any feedback or any ideas that you may have. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good program year.